Welcome to the World War Archive. I'm your host, Jim Beaver, and today we embark on a difficult but essential journey through one of history's darkest chapters. This podcast examines the systematic persecution and murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others by the Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. We'll explore not just what happened, but how it happened, the mechanisms, the people involved, and the circumstances that allowed such unprecedented evil to unfold. This is not just a story of victims, but of perpetrators, bystanders, and the rare individuals who chose to help. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that today's content contains disturbing historical information about genocide, medical experimentation, and mass murder. We present these facts not to sensationalize, but to understand, remember, and learn. And if you're looking to explore more historical investigations, powerful nonfiction stories, and the human psychology behind the darkest moments in history, be sure to check out Skoob, the AI-powered podcast app that curates deeply researched, short-form episodes to fit in your busy schedule and feed your curiosity. Download Skoob from the App Store or Play Store and gain access to a world of knowledge, personalized for how you think, learn, and listen. Now let's begin. To understand the Holocaust, we must begin before the gas chambers, before the deportation trains, before the final solution itself. We must start with a document signed on September 1st, 1939, the same day Germany invaded Poland. On that date, Adolf Hitler dispatched a directive to Philipp Bouhler, the head of his chancellery. The order was chilling in its bureaucratic simplicity: mandate the extermination of the chronically insane and incurably ill individuals. This program, carried out by SS doctors, would become the testing ground for techniques later used in the Holocaust. Think about that for a moment. While the world's attention focused on tanks rolling into Poland, Hitler was simultaneously launching a secret program to murder disabled Germans. Approximately 70,000 Germans fell victim to this so-called euthanasia program. The methods developed here, the use of gas chambers disguised as shower rooms, the bureaucratic selection process, the psychological conditioning of personnel, would all be refined and expanded. But here's what's remarkable. This program faced resistance. Two influential German clerics, Bishop Wurm of Württemberg and Bishop Count Galen of Münster, voiced public protests. Their opposition was so effective that Hitler received a telephone call in late August 1941, ostensibly ending the program. Yet the infrastructure remained. The euthanasia centers stayed operational, continuing to facilitate the deaths of mentally ill patients taken from concentration camps. The personnel moved on to new assignments. The lessons learned were documented and preserved. This wasn't just a precursor to genocide, it was genocide itself. It established the principle that some lives were deemed unworthy of life, a concept that would be central to Nazi ideology. By 1933, when Hitler came to power, the Nazi regime had already embraced the notion that human lives held different values based on racial and genetic criteria. The compulsory sterilization program, launched in the 1930s, affected roughly 300,000 Germans with mental illnesses. What we see here is not a sudden descent into barbarism, but a methodical progression, each step making the next seem less shocking, more acceptable, more routine. As we move deeper into this history, we encounter the men who would orchestrate the final solution. Understanding their motivations and methods helps us comprehend how systematic genocide became not just possible, but efficient. Heinrich Himmler stands as perhaps the most chilling example of bureaucratic evil. In a notorious speech delivered on October 4, 1943, in Poznan to high-ranking SS officers, Himmler articulated his rationale for the final solution with terrifying clarity. He compared the extermination of Jews to what he called a hygienic initiative, likening Jews to harmful bacteria that needed eradication to prevent potential infection and destruction of the German population. But Himmler went further. His concerns about what he termed Jewish contagion extended to women and children, rationalizing that leaving any survivors could lead to future generations seeking vengeance against Germans. Listen to how he framed this genocide. The Jewish race had to be eliminated from existence. Not displaced, not relocated. Eliminated. This wasn't the rhetoric of a madman, but the calculated language of a systematic administrator discussing policy implementation. Himmler was meticulous in his approach. He spoke of Jews as potential saboteurs and agitators who, if left alive, could undermine the German war effort during bombing raids and wartime hardships. He referenced historical contexts, suggesting that their continued existence during the current war could replicate what he saw as societal problems from 1916 to 17. But perhaps most disturbing was how Himmler addressed the moral complexities of genocide. He depicted SS officers as maintaining their decency amid these atrocities. He described the Holocaust as an unwritten page of glory in German history, transforming mass murder into a sacred mission to craft what he called a superior Aryan race. The bureaucratic language is crucial to understand. Himmler candidly referred to the Holocaust as Ausrottung, the extermination of the Jewish people, while simultaneously framing it as necessary state policy. This wasn't hidden or denied. It was openly discussed among Nazi leadership as administrative necessity. Yet Himmler was ultimately pragmatic. In the closing stages of World War II, he made covert attempts to negotiate with Western allies, proposing to exchange Jews for military leverage. By November 1944, without directives from higher authorities, he unilaterally commanded the cessation of Jewish gassings, hoping this gesture might facilitate a secret alliance with the West against the Soviet Union. This reveals the chilling truth. For Himmler and his colleagues, genocide was policy, something that could be implemented, paused, or negotiated based on strategic calculations. The Holocaust required logistics on an unprecedented scale. How do you move millions of people to their deaths without alerting the general population? How do you maintain the deception while achieving maximum efficiency? The answer lay in Germany's extensive railroad system. The deportation of victims to death camps began in earnest in the spring of 1942, continuing with intensified momentum over the subsequent 2 years. These operations were executed within the framework of the Final Solution, formally ratified at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. The railroad system wasn't chosen by accident. No other method could move such large numbers of people quickly and discreetly. Trucks would have consumed precious wartime resources needed for military operations. Marching victims on foot would have exposed the Nazi plans to the general population. But trains? Trains were routine, unremarkable, invisible. The early operations focused on transporting German Jews to crowded ghettos in occupied Poland, then to locations like Riga in Latvia. But as the network expanded, it became a systematic conveyor belt of death, moving Jews and other targeted populations directly to concentration and extermination camps. This required unprecedented coordination across government sectors: the Reich Security Main Office, the Transport Ministry, the Foreign Office, and numerous railroad personnel. German Allied territories were expected to comply by surrendering their Jewish citizens. The collaboration was extensive and voluntary. The trains themselves tell a story of calculated cruelty. Most victims were transported in freight cars designed to hold at most 50 people, but often stuffed with up to 150 individuals due to car shortages. Each train carried around 55 cars, their maximum due to speed limitations. These cars provided no water, no food, only a bucket for waste. Ventilation came from a single barred window. The conditions were designed to dehumanize. Extreme temperatures caused suffering in both summer heat and winter cold. Many died from suffocation before reaching their destination. But perhaps most telling, these trains were given the lowest priority on the rail network. Military convoys took precedence, meaning journeys that should have taken a day often extended to 4.5 days, with passenger cars stranded on sidings. The journey from the Greek island of Corfu to Auschwitz took 18 days. Many died before even reaching the camps. When trains finally arrived, they often carried corpses alongside the living. But here's the detail that reveals the systematic nature of this evil. Victims were required to purchase tickets for their own deportation. Full fare for adults, half fare for children. This generated approximately 240 million Reichmarks for the Nazi regime, roughly $201 million in contemporary terms. At the height of operations, as many as 10 trains arrived each week at the camps. The frequency only diminished after the Allied invasion of France in summer 1944, ceasing entirely as the Nazi regime crumbled in spring 1945. The trains weren't just transportation, they were part of the killing process itself, designed to break the spirit and often claim lives before victims even reach the camps. In 1942, the Nazis established 3 camps that represented a sinister innovation in the machinery of genocide: Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. These installations had no historical equivalent, even within the Nazi system itself. Unlike Auschwitz, which combined forced labor with extermination, these camps served only one purpose: death. Belzec was the pioneering camp, with construction beginning in November 1941. Located roughly 500 meters from a railway station in southeastern Poland, it emerged from what the SS termed a local problem: the extermination of Jews they deemed unproductive in the surrounding area. The man placed in command tells us everything about Nazi priorities. SS Hauptsturmführer Christian Wirth had trained as a carpenter and served in World War I, earning commendations for bravery. But by 1939, he had become a key figure in euthanasia operations against the mentally ill, overseeing their execution through carbon monoxide. Known by the ominous epithet "Savage Christian," Wirth was notorious for personally murdering Jews and forcing his subordinates to commit acts of extreme violence. At Belzec, Wirth implemented a morbid evolution of killing technology. He used carbon monoxide gas as the primary method of murder, but unlike earlier euthanasia programs that relied on bottled gas, he generated carbon monoxide from standard combustion engines. The gas chambers were deceitfully designed as shower rooms, with gas emitted through fake showerheads, adding layers of deception to an already horrific trap. The architectural planning reveals the camp's singular purpose. Recognizing that arrivals were condemned to die within hours, Belzec was constructed with minimal facilities. The entire camp spanned less than 300 meters square. The scale often surprises visitors today. These 3 camps combined could fit within the expanse of Auschwitz-Birkenau, yet they achieved devastating efficiency in their confined spaces. The numbers are staggering. Roughly 1.7 million people were murdered at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, exceeding Auschwitz's death toll by 600,000 victims. This efficiency was achieved through careful design and ruthless organization. Belzec consisted of 2 sub-camps. Camp 1 featured the railway arrival zone, barracks for disrobing, storage for victims' belongings, and a roll call square. The gas chambers were hidden in Camp 2, concealed by natural barriers and camouflaged fences. A narrow passageway called the Tube connected the 2 areas, maintaining the deception until the final moments. 3 distinct groups operated these death factories. The first, most disturbing group, consisted of Jews themselves. Wirth realized that involving Jews in camp operations reduced the psychological burden on German personnel while satisfying his perverted desire to inflict additional psychological torture. Hundreds of able-bodied Jews were selected from arriving transports and forced into roles, cleaning gas chambers, burying corpses, and sorting through victims' belongings. The second group comprised local Polish workers and Soviet POWs, employed under duress for menial tasks. They were kept largely ignorant of the camp's true purpose through strict compartmentalization. The final group included German SS officers and personnel who supervised the killing process and managed daily operations according to Wirth's directives. This organization reveals a crucial aspect of Holocaust implementation: the systematic involvement of victims in their own persecution, the exploitation of local populations, and the careful insulation of German personnel from the full psychological impact of their crimes. Oh, and if this episode is challenging your understanding, as it should, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Staying connected ensures you never miss an episode as we continue to uncover the mechanisms and mindsets behind history's darkest chapters. Your engagement isn't just support for a show, it's a commitment to remember, to question, and to learn. Now, getting back to one of the darkest hours in history, perhaps no aspect of the Holocaust is more disturbing than the involvement of medical professionals, people sworn to heal, who instead became central to systematic murder. The participation of doctors in the final solution reveals how completely Nazi ideology corrupted even the most fundamental human values. At Auschwitz, SS doctors were not mere bystanders, but were embedded in every phase of the genocidal process. They conducted selections at the arrival ramp, determining who would be sent to work and who would be sent immediately to death. They oversaw the killing process itself. Most infamously, they conducted medical experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. The symbol of this perversion was hauntingly clear. Zyklon B, the chemical agent used in gas chambers, was transported in vehicles marked with the Red Cross symbol. Ambulances, symbols of healing and rescue, became delivery systems for mass murder. To understand how doctors reconciled their actions with medical ethics, we must recognize that Auschwitz represented not an abrupt departure from Nazi policy, but its logical conclusion. Since 1933, Nazi governance had embraced the principle that some lives held more value than others based on racial and genetic criteria. The progression was methodical. The compulsory sterilization program of the 1930s affected 300,000 Germans with mental illnesses. The adult euthanasia program beginning in 1939 provided direct training for Holocaust personnel. Prominent figures like Christian Wirth and Franz Stangl, who later commanded death camps, began their careers participating in the murder of disabled individuals. Crucially, the euthanasia program's selection process involved doctors, not law enforcement. This elevated the elimination of life unworthy of life to a central principle of Nazi medical practice. By the time Dr. Eberl assumed command of Treblinka death camp, the ideology designating certain people as unworthy of life had been fully integrated into medical thinking. Nazi doctors developed elaborate justifications for their actions. Dr. Fritz Klein, a Nazi physician, articulated this twisted logic when he compared Jews to a gangrenous appendix in the body of society, rationalizing their extermination as protecting human life. From this perverted perspective, places like Auschwitz were framed as health management operations, eliminating those perceived as threats to state health. This perversion of medical principles appeared in the early killings at Auschwitz, where those deemed unfit for work were executed in Block 10, the hospital block, through lethal phenol injections. The concept of hospital was grotesquely inverted from a place of healing to a site of death. By 1942, with systematized selections upon arrival, Nazi doctors became essential to mass murder mechanics. They held authority to decide who would work and who would die, making these determinations almost instantaneously. Their involvement served both practical and philosophical purposes, asserting that medical professionals could quickly evaluate labor capacity while shrouding killings in supposed scientific rationale. The involvement of doctors created a false impression that genocidal actions weren't arbitrary acts of hatred, but systematic necessities for societal health. Auschwitz was presented not as chaotic slaughter, but as calculated policy contributing to state well-being. But it was through medical experiments that Auschwitz doctors achieved their most notorious infamy, the use of prisoners for experiments aligned with Nazi ideology that even in death, enemies of the state should serve Reich interests. For ambitious doctors unburdened by moral constraints, Auschwitz provided an unprecedented research environment. Dr. Karl Klauberg and Dr. Horst Schumann conducted sterilization experiments. Dr. Schumann had prior euthanasia program involvement, having worked at the Sonnenstein Killing Center. The connection between euthanasia and Holocaust personnel was direct and intentional. These actions reveal the unfathomable extent of moral corruption under Nazi ideology, the complete perversion of scientific and medical ethics in service of genocide. Among the Nazi doctors, one name has become synonymous with medical evil: Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death. His story illuminates how individual sadism combined with systematic genocide to create unprecedented horror. Mengele's notoriety stems from both his character and the opportunities Auschwitz provided. He reveled in the authority and experimental possibilities the camp offered. His arrival coincided with the completion of Birkenau crematoria, marking Auschwitz's most destructive phase. What made Mengele particularly chilling was his paradoxical nature, observed by multiple survivors. Despite his immaculate SS uniform and sometimes charming demeanor, he was capable of extreme cruelty. Some witnesses saw him smile and exchange pleasantries. Others watched him shoot a mother and child on impulse. Vera Alexander, a Czechoslovakian inmate who supervised a block housing Romani and Polish children, experienced this duality firsthand. Mengele visited regularly, often bringing chocolates for the children. When Alexander scolded them, they would threaten to tell their uncle, their term for Mengele. This seemingly benevolent facade masked his true purpose. The children were subjects for his experiments. Alexander recounted the heartbreaking reality. Children would return from visits to their good uncle with agonizing screams, the sounds of medical torture replacing the temporary joy of chocolate treats. Mengele's primary obsession was the study of twins, connected to his earlier focus on hereditary biology. Camp rumors suggested he aimed to discover conditions facilitating multiple births to accelerate population growth for the Reich. More likely, he was obsessed with understanding genetics' role in development and behavior, a fascination shared by many Nazi scientists. Eva Moses Kor provides first-hand testimony of Mengele's methods. At age 10 in 1944, she and her identical twin Miriam became Mengele's subjects. His routine involved daily inspections after roll calls to assess his guinea pigs. Eva endured systematic torture, both arms bound for blood collection 3 times weekly, with large extractions from her left arm often causing her to faint. Simultaneously, she received mysterious injections in her right arm. After one injection, she became gravely ill. Mengele, accompanied by other doctors, assessed her condition with malicious sarcasm, predicting her death. "Too bad, she is so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." Despite falling into semi-consciousness, Eva's determination to survive was absolute. Her survival was crucial. Had she died, Miriam would have been immediately killed with a heart injection to enable comparative post-mortem examinations in Mengele's laboratory. This reveals the twisted logic of Mengele's experiments. Dr. Miklos Naisli, a Jewish doctor imprisoned and forced to work under Mengele, highlighted the uniqueness of this scenario in medical history, the simultaneous deaths of twins allowing comparative autopsies. Mengele's experiments represent the complete perversion of scientific inquiry during the Holocaust. His actions demonstrate how scientific methodology could be corrupted to serve genocidal ideology, transforming medical research from healing into systematic torture and murder. The legacy of Mengele extends beyond his individual crimes. He represents how educated professionals, trained in healing, could become instruments of unprecedented evil when institutional frameworks removed moral constraints and ideological justifications replaced ethical principles. Among Holocaust deniers, one of the most persistent false claims is that Nazis did not use gas chambers for mass murder. Understanding the evidence for these facilities and why some people deny their existence reveals important truths about both historical fact and the nature of denial itself. The assertion seems almost absurd given the physical evidence. Gas chambers and crematoria remain at former campsites. How could anyone deny their use for systematic extermination? Yet denial persists, often seizing on statements like historian Arno Mayer's observation that sources for the study of the gas chambers are at once rare and unreliable. Holocaust deniers have misinterpreted Mayer's statement as supporting their false narrative, but examining Mayer's complete argument reveals the opposite conclusion. He explains that while Hitler and the Nazis openly declared war against Jewish people, SS operatives meticulously worked to destroy evidence of their genocidal activities. This destruction was systematic and intentional. No written orders for gassing operations have been discovered because the SS demolished most camp records before Soviet arrival. They deliberately destroyed the majority of killing and cremation facilities. Special care was taken to dispose of victims' bones and ashes, further erasing physical proof of atrocities. Mayer's observations explain why tangible evidence might not be as overwhelming as expected. Not because the crimes didn't occur, but because the perpetrators worked systematically to hide their actions. Deniers don't typically refute the existence of gas chambers and crematoria. Instead, they falsely claim these facilities were used only for delousing clothing and that crematoria served merely to dispose of people who died from natural causes within camps. This distortion confronts the stark reality that Nazis deliberately attempted to erase evidence of their crimes. The effort to conceal evidence becomes evidence itself of systematic genocide. The technology and methods reveal the calculated nature of these operations. At Belzec, Christian Wirth implemented carbon monoxide gas generated from combustion engines rather than bottled gas. Gas chambers were disguised as shower rooms, with gas emitted through fake shower heads. These deceptions required planning, engineering, and systematic implementation. At Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss conducted experiments with various killing methods beginning in June 1941. Shooting was deemed too inefficient and chaotic. Carbon monoxide appeared insufficiently effective. In August 1941, using 500 Soviet prisoners as test subjects, Höss experimented with Zyklon B. Zyklon B, produced by pest control firm Degesch, an IG Farben associate, proved effective for mass killings. The SS made large-scale requisitions for the gas, specifically requesting removal of its odorant warning indicator. IG Farben's dividends from Degesch doubled between 1942 and 1944, despite at least one director knowing the gas's purpose. This industrial involvement reveals the systematic nature of genocide implementation. Private companies participated in mass murder for profit, adapting commercial products for genocidal purposes. The evidence for gas chamber use in mass murder is overwhelming. Survivor testimony, perpetrator confessions, physical remains, documentary evidence, and industrial records. The systematic attempt to destroy evidence actually strengthens the historical case, revealing the calculated nature of Nazi crimes and their awareness of moral culpability. Denial persists not because evidence is lacking, but because acknowledging this evidence requires confronting the reality of systematic human evil, a reality some find too disturbing to accept. How does mass murder become routine? How do ordinary people participate in extraordinary evil? These questions have haunted scholars since 1945, as they struggle to understand not just what happened during the Holocaust, but how it was psychologically possible. Since World War II ended, Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust have become central to moral philosophy. Hitler is often portrayed as the embodiment of evil, the Holocaust as the most atrocious act in human history. But identifying Hitler as evil doesn't explain the origins of his actions or how systematic genocide became not just possible, but administratively routine. The uncomfortable truth is that the Holocaust was carried out by humans. These actions reflect potentials that exist within human behavior, making the events both historically unique and universally relevant to understanding human nature. Social psychologist Roy Baumeister offers crucial insights through his research on violence and evil. He discovered that while killing typically has a repulsive effect on most people, mass killings can paradoxically become routine through psychological processes that transform extraordinary acts into administrative duties. This reveals what Hannah Arendt termed the banality of evil, characterized by stark disparity between crime magnitude and perpetrator personality. The most disturbing aspect isn't that monsters committed these acts, but that ordinary people became complicit through institutional frameworks that normalized atrocity. To understand this phenomenon, we must examine perspectives of both victims and perpetrators. Maximilian Grabner, head of Auschwitz's political department under Rudolf Höss, offered explanations reflecting perpetrator psychology. He claimed his Holocaust involvement resulted from circumstances beyond his control, placing blame on National Socialism rather than personal choice. Grabner portrayed himself as lacking anti-Semitism, claiming belief in every person's right to live. He asserted joining the Nazi Party not from conviction, but from concern for his family's welfare. This illustrates how normal individuals became complicit in extreme acts through societal and political pressures that made participation seem like reasonable self-preservation. The progression from individual resistance to institutional compliance reveals systematic methods for overcoming moral barriers. Initial euthanasia programs targeting disabled individuals established precedents for medical killing. Personnel moved from these programs to Holocaust operations, carrying psychological conditioning and technical expertise. The compartmentalization of genocide operations prevented most participants from seeing complete pictures of their involvement. Railroad workers transported people without knowing destinations. Factory workers produced Zyklon B without understanding applications. Doctors conducted selections without witnessing gas chamber operations. This division of labor distributed moral responsibility while maintaining operational efficiency. Language played a crucial role in this transformation. Nazi terminology transformed murder into administrative necessities. Final solution: special treatment, resettlement, evacuation. This euphemistic language allowed participants to psychologically distance themselves from the reality of their actions. The systematic nature of Holocaust implementation reveals how institutional frameworks can transform moral individuals into genocidal participants. Understanding this process isn't about excusing perpetrators, but about recognizing warning signs when societies begin devaluing human life based on group membership. The Holocaust demonstrates that genocide isn't the product of unique historical circumstances or exceptional evil, but emerges from systematic processes that can potentially occur in any society where institutional authorities legitimize violence against designated groups. One of the most persistent attempts to minimize Holocaust reality involves claiming that Adolf Hitler was unaware of the systematic extermination of Jews. This assertion forms a cornerstone of Holocaust denial, suggesting the genocide wasn't a preconceived policy, but rather actions taken without Hitler's knowledge or approval. David Irving, in his controversial 1977 work, Hitler's War, argued that Hitler was unaware of the Holocaust and challenged anyone to produce documented evidence of Hitler's direct orders for Jewish extermination. He even offered $1,000 for such documentation. Irving pointed to SS Chief Heinrich Himmler's telephone notes from November 30, 1941, recording a conversation with Reinhard Heydrich from Hitler's Wolf's Lair bunker. The note read, "Jewish transport from Berlin. No liquidation." Irving interpreted this as proof that Hitler opposed Jewish liquidation. But this interpretation demonstrates the snapshot fallacy, taking isolated evidence out of context. Holocaust historian Raoul Hilberg explained that the note referred only to one specific transport, not Jewish population policy generally. Despite the directive, this particular transport was indeed liquidated upon arrival in Riga, Latvia. The incident actually implicates Hitler directly in Holocaust decision-making. The fact that Hitler needed to halt a liquidation order suggests such actions were ongoing procedures. If exterminations weren't occurring, why would there be directives to stop specific ones? Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and close associate, remarked on Hitler's control over major decisions. No major decisions could be made about anything without his approval. Speer specifically noted that the transition from shooting to gas chambers would likely have required Hitler's decision. Yisrael Gutmann, a Holocaust historian and survivor, emphasized Hitler's active involvement. All the people around Hitler came with their plans and initiatives because they knew that Hitler was interested in solving the Jewish question, and they wanted to please him and be the first to realize his intentions and his spirit. Whether formal written orders existed becomes irrelevant when the Holocaust ethos emanated from Hitler's rhetoric and was understood by subordinates without explicit instructions. The genocide manifested through shared understanding among Nazi leaders, synchronization with Hitler's ideologies rather than specific commands. This ingrained animosity traces back to Hitler's earliest political statements. In a 1922 Munich speech, he described Jews as destructive by nature, dismissing their community as detrimental to society's common good. 23 years later, amid World War II's devastation, Hitler reaffirmed his stance by declaring intent to exterminate what he called parasitic vermin in Europe. Hitler's prejudice extended beyond rhetoric into policy foundations. In his January 1939 Reichstag speech, he explicitly stated that if Jewish economic influence caused another world war, it would result not in Bolshevization of the earth, but in annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. In discussions with Hungarian leadership, Hitler compared Jews to infectious agents, framing their extermination as necessary protection for German population purity and strength. Semantic arguments often obscure these realities. The German word ausrotten, meaning exterminate, appears throughout Nazi communications. Irving argued this word didn't carry lethal connotations during the Nazi era, suggesting meanings like stamping out or rooting out. Historical dictionaries contradict Irving's claims. Ausrotten consistently meant to exterminate, unchanged over time. Contextual evidence supports this interpretation. In Hitler's August 1936 four-year plan memorandum, he expressed concern that Soviet overrunning of Germany would lead to Ausrotten of the German people, clearly meaning complete annihilation. During a December 1944 Ardennes attack conference, Hitler ordered generals to ausrotten American troops division by division. In this military context, the term unambiguously called for physical elimination. The historical evidence firmly disputes Holocaust denial narratives. The systematic genocide under Nazi leadership was deeply rooted in Hitler's philosophies and policies, implemented through his direct involvement and ideological guidance. His responsibility for crimes against humanity committed under his regime is supported by overwhelming documentation and testimony. One of the most haunting questions about the Holocaust concerns the response of ordinary people. Why didn't more Germans help Jews? Why didn't more people across occupied Europe resist or assist victims? Understanding these failures reveals the complex circumstances that enabled genocide. In Germany, most citizens were either intimidated by the oppressive regime or had become desensitized to Jewish persecution. Many focused attention on economic and political improvements Hitler appeared to bring before World War II, as well as German military successes during the war's early phases. The Nazi government effectively obscured final solution realities by conducting activities in secret, deliberately positioning extermination camps in occupied territories rather than within Germany proper. Consequently, rumors about death camps were often dismissed as Allied propaganda fabrications. Even Germans who felt sympathy for Jews were deterred from action by pervasive atmospheres of suspicion and fear. Colleagues, friends, or neighbors could be Nazi informers ready to report dissent. Attempting to smuggle Jews out of Germany was extremely dangerous. National borders were surrounded by Nazi-occupied countries, while neutral Switzerland refused entry to civilian refugees from 1942 onward. These circumstances, concern for personal safety, disbelief, fear, state propaganda, and practical obstacles hindered potential rescue efforts within Germany itself. Poland's situation reveals different but equally devastating dynamics. Before World War II, approximately 3.3 million Jews lived in Poland. Tragically, over 3 million became Holocaust victims, a devastating 90% fatality rate. Several factors contributed to this catastrophic loss. From occupation's beginning, Poland was subjected to extremely harsh Nazi rule. S&S German police exercised substantial control regardless of administrative divisions the Third Reich established. Nazis viewed Polish people as subhuman, destined for enslavement or elimination, meaning they felt no need to moderate policies based on Polish public opinion. Poland's division by enemies and isolation from Western allies created environments where German authorities could easily enforce Jewish resettlement and ghettoization policies between 1939 and 1941. Germany established extermination camps on Polish territory and efficiently relocated Jews from surrounding ghettos to these facilities. Pre-existing tensions between Poles and Jews, exacerbated by wartime conditions, constrained organized Polish assistance to Jewish populations. Internal disagreements among Jewish communities about resistance strategies also hampered growth and success of Jewish resistance movements. The German Blitzkrieg campaign in September 1939 left Poland devastated and defenseless. Swift military assault obliterated Polish military ranks, rendering the nation vulnerable to subsequent atrocities. Driven by ideological goals, Nazis aimed to resettle Poland along racial lines, reclaiming territories lost after World War I. Nazi colonization efforts involved forcibly uprooting over 1 million Poles, deporting them as laborers to other territories, or eventually to work within the Reich. To prevent potential uprisings, German regimes executed Polish elite members, clergy, intellectuals, politicians, professionals, who might lead or support rebellion. Simultaneously, Germany imposed measures isolating and persecuting Polish Jews. On September 21, 1939, SS Einsatzgruppen received orders to clear annexed Polish territories of Jews, relocating them to specific areas along railway lines. Jewish ghetto creation between 1939 and 1941 facilitated systematic segregation, introducing organized exploitation and debilitation measures. Each ghetto required a Jewish council, Judenrat, of prominent individuals tasked with enforcing German policies. Deaths from shootings, disease, and starvation within ghettos contributed significantly, approximately 20% of Polish Jewish fatalities under Nazi occupation. The Soviet Union invasion saw Einsatzgruppen systematically executing 1/3 of 1.5 million Polish Jews in areas annexed by Russia in 1939. These circumstances reveal how Nazi policies systematically eliminated potential rescue opportunities while maximizing Jewish isolation and vulnerability. The failure to save more lives resulted not from indifference alone, but from deliberate Nazi strategies that made rescue extremely dangerous while providing few realistic opportunities for successful assistance. Understanding these failures helps recognize how genocide succeeds through systematic elimination of rescue possibilities rather than simply individual moral failures. As we conclude this examination of the Holocaust, we're left with profound questions that extend far beyond historical understanding. This wasn't just a German phenomenon or a Jewish tragedy. It was a human catastrophe that reveals both the depths of evil humans can perpetrate and the systems that enable such evil to flourish. The Holocaust demonstrates how quickly civilized societies can descend into barbarism when institutional safeguards fail and when people surrender moral responsibility to authority figures. It shows how ordinary individuals can become complicit in extraordinary evil through processes that make atrocity seem routine, necessary, or inevitable. But the Holocaust also reveals human capacity for resistance and courage. Bishop Wurm and Bishop Count Galen's protests against euthanasia programs, Eva Moses Kor's determination to survive Mengelé's experiments, the Jewish resistance movements that emerged despite impossible odds, the individuals who risked everything to help victims, even when such help seemed futile. The systematic nature of Holocaust denial efforts reminds us that the struggle against evil doesn't end with historical events themselves. False narratives that minimize or deny genocide continue to threaten truth and memory. Understanding how denial operates through selective evidence, semantic manipulation, and emotional appeal helps us recognize similar patterns in contemporary contexts. Perhaps most importantly, the Holocaust teaches us that genocide isn't the product of unique historical circumstances or exceptional evil, but emerges from systematic processes that can potentially occur when societies begin devaluing human life based on group membership. The progression from medical killing of disabled individuals to systematic genocide of entire populations reveals how moral boundaries can be systematically eroded through institutional authority and ideological justification. Understanding these processes isn't about excusing perpetrators, but about recognizing warning signs and maintaining vigilance against similar developments. In years following the war, several railway companies issued apologies for their wartime roles, including Nederlandse Spoorwegen in 2005 and French SNCF in 2011. These acknowledgments represent important steps in confronting institutional complicity, but they also remind us that accountability often comes decades too late to help victims. The Holocaust challenges us to remain vigilant against dehumanization, to resist institutional pressures that compromise moral principles, and to speak out against injustice even when doing so involves personal risk. It reminds us that silence in the face of evil becomes complicity, and that individual choices matter even within systems designed to eliminate moral agency. As survivors pass away and direct memory fades, our responsibility to preserve accurate historical understanding becomes more crucial. The voices of survivors like Eva Moses Kor, the documentation by witnesses like Miklos Nisli, the confessions of perpetrators like Maximilian Grabner, these testimonies form irreplaceable records that must be preserved and understood. The Holocaust stands as both historical event and moral warning. It demonstrates human capacity for systematic evil while simultaneously affirming the importance of individual moral choice, institutional accountability, and collective memory in preventing future genocides. We remember not just to honor victims, but to understand perpetrators and bystanders, to comprehend how ordinary people become complicit in extraordinary evil and how societies can construct systems that make genocide possible. Only through such understanding can we hope to recognize and resist similar developments in our own time. The Holocaust happened because people made choices to obey orders, to remain silent, to prioritize personal safety over moral principle, to transform fellow humans into enemies worthy of elimination. But it also revealed that people could make different choices to resist, to help, to maintain humanity in inhuman circumstances. Understanding this history remains essential not because it provides simple lessons or clear answers, but because it reveals the complexity of human moral choice and the ongoing responsibility each generation bears to protect human dignity and resist systematic dehumanization in all its forms. The Holocaust ended in 1945, but the human capacity for both evil and good continues. Our response to this history, how we remember, how we learn, how we act when confronted with injustice in our own time, determines whether these 6 million deaths and millions of other victims will have meaning beyond their own immeasurable loss. I'm your host, Jim Beaver, and this has been the World War Archive. Thank you for joining us for this difficult but essential examination of Holocaust history. For more information about Holocaust education and remembrance, we encourage you to visit established memorial institutions and educational organizations dedicated to preserving this history and its lessons. And if you want to dive deeper into historical truth, human psychology, and the moral complexities of the past, we highly recommend exploring Skoob, the AI-powered podcast app that brings you short, powerful episodes across different channels. Whether you're seeking to understand the Holocaust, genocide, or the mechanisms of authoritarianism, Skoob curates expert-led, deeply researched content that helps you learn faster and think deeper. Download the Skoob app today from the App Store or Play Store and continue your journey into the stories that must not be forgotten. Remember, never forget, never again.